Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias a quienes ya se están conectando. Los invitamos pues a que tengan presente que este evento va a ser transmitido por nuestro canal de YouTube. Ya hemos iniciado el streaming por si lo quieren compartir, por si lo quieren guardar. Yo ahorita les pongo en el chat cuál va a ser como ese enlace para que lo tengan presente. Como les decía a quienes se conectaron ahorita temprano, vamos a tener una traducción simultánea al español, dado que este evento principalmente va a ser en inglés. Ustedes pueden ver a través del icono que dice interpretación, que tiene un mapa mundi. Ahí pueden tener este audio original donde vamos a estar hablando, pero al que ahorita vamos a cambiar a inglés, o sea, donde vamos a empezar a hablar en inglés en este audio original, y tienen el audio en español para que ustedes conozcan, pues para que puedan ver esta presentación en español, ¿vale? Quienes se encuentran en el Zoom, darles la indicación de que pueden interactuar con nosotros a través del chat o la sección de preguntas y respuestas. ¿Listo? Y en esta sección de preguntas y respuestas nosotros estaremos organizando cada una de estas preguntas que se puedan tener para Tasha o para quien vaya a intervenir durante este espacio. ¿Listo? Finalmente, invitarlos a que tengan presentes nuestras redes sociales de Rumbo. Somos los organizadores de este tour de la transferencia social con Fulbright, y a cada una de nuestras universidades ha servido como anfitrión en este momento para cada una de las actividades de este tour. En este momento nos encontramos pues organizando esta parada del tour con la CUN, quienes nos estarán acompañando esta noche con dos actividades con nuestra experta de Fulbright, Tasha. ¿Listo? Le voy a dar la palabra ahora a nuestro director ejecutivo, Juan Mauricio Benítez. Tengan presente que pueden compartir reflexiones, comentarios, preguntas, apreciaciones de este evento con el hashtag Tool de Transferencia Social Rumbo a través de cada una de estas redes sociales que les tengo aquí presentadas, ¿vale? Con esto pues damos inicio a esta primera actividad que está llamada el taller Impactos Emocionales y Cognitivos generados en el marco del estrés como consecuencia de la pandemia y estrategias de manejo pedagógico. ¿Listo? Con esto, pues le doy el paso ahora a Juan Mauricio para que nos haga la presentación oficial y el inicio de este evento. Muchísimas gracias. Ok, creo que Juan Mauricio está ahorita con una dificultad técnica con su Zoom. Entonces, pues yo creo que vamos a darle paso a William Eduardo, que nos va a hacer la presentación desde la CUN de esta actividad. Um, Tasha, we're going to begin this activity. William is going to be the person from the CUN University who is going to represent the university in this activity, and he's going to do well the beginning of this event. Thank you all for joining us. As I was telling you, we have a Spanish channel, and you can hear the translation of this event in that channel right here in the Zoom. So thank you everyone, and William, you have your turn.
Gracias, muchísimas gracias, Pablo. Bienvenidos todos. Tasha, ¿cómo estás? Es un gusto tenerte en la universidad. Muchísimas gracias por venir a darnos este ciclo de conferencias. En el día de hoy estamos reunidos principalmente investigadores y profesores. Investigadores que hemos tenido dificultades emocionales, afectivas, durante esta pandemia. Yo quisiera pues presentarte un poco el público porque somos investigadores de múltiples regionales, es decir, de muchas zonas de Colombia en las que pues se ha vivido esta pandemia de una manera muy intensa, principalmente por un encerramiento muy prolongado, casi de 1 año y medio, que ha tenido unas consecuencias muy fuertes dentro de la comunidad de investigadores. Alguna depresión, algunos elementos de saturación, de cansancio. Y también voy a hacer tu presentación a la comunidad de investigadores. Bien. Entonces,
Espera, William, dame un minutico. Juan Mauricio ya entró, entonces hagamos
perfecto.
como tal la presentación que pues era como nuestro primer paso, pero bueno, ya te damos ahorita nuevamente la palabra.
Muy bien.
Vale.
Buenas tardes para todos. Buenas tardes, Tasha. Buenas tardes, William. Y buenas tardes a todos los que nos acompañan desde la CUN. Les ofrezco disculpas. Algo pasó con mi computador. Duré media hora intentando entrar al Zoom. Hi, Tasha. Sorry for being late and welcome to this event. Muchas gracias. Nosotros desde Rumbo estamos muy contentos de poder ser los anfitriones de estas 3 semanas de este tour de la transferencia social Fulbright Rumbo, donde con nuestro especialista de Fulbright, Tasha Howe, hemos estado en diferentes universidades, conociendo sus experiencias, también compartiéndonos ella parte de su conocimiento, de sus historias. Y nosotros desde Rumbo como red académica seguimos consolidando estos espacios para fortalecer a la academia, para fortalecer la investigación y para fortalecer a nuestras universidades miembros. Nuevamente, pues les pido disculpas por conectarme un poco tarde, fue algo que se me salió de mi alcance, pero ya no tengo mucho más la continuidad de este evento y le vuelvo a dar la palabra a William para que continúe con la presentación de nuestra US Specialist de Fulbright, Tasha Howe. Adelante, William.
Muchísimas gracias, Juan. Como tú lo dices, vamos a continuar con la presentación de Tasha Howe. Tasha es principalmente psicólogo de la Universidad de California de Santa Bárbara. Hizo su máster y su PhD en la Universidad de California sobre psicología del desarrollo, y es miembro postdoctoral también de la Universidad de Vanderbilt. Ha recibido múltiples reconocimientos, múltiples invitaciones. También su experiencia docente se ha centrado en el desarrollo cognitivo de los niños, la relación padre-hijo, el desarrollo humano, introducción a la psicología. Ha trabajado en la Universidad de Zagreb, en Croacia, en la Universidad Europea de Chipre, en el Instituto de Kentucky para Estudios Internacionales. Como ven ustedes, ahí tenemos una experta muy con un gran recorrido, con una gran producción también bibliográfica. Está con nosotros hoy en la CUN y ha venido también haciendo este ciclo de conferencias para hoy. Nuestra conferencia está especialmente pensada para aquellas situaciones emocionales y psicoafectivos que se han presentado frente a esta pandemia. Tasha, muchísimas gracias y bienvenida. Te doy el paso. Gracias por estar acá en la CUN con todos los investigadores.
Muchas gracias, William, for that wonderful introduction. The translator is trying to work out a bug. I'm not sure if she's translating now. You can give me a thumbs up if you hear her translation. Well.
Sí, te escuchamos en el canal de español.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me this evening and for the great invitation from Rumbo and from Fulbright in Columbia. Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about the impact of the pandemic on higher education, as well as some strategies that we've used at our university to cope with it now, as well as plan for the next fall semester. You may have already done some of these strategies, so I'm not pretending that I'm an expert on dealing with COVID, because I have also been sitting in my dining room for 16 months working from home, running the largest department on our campus during a pandemic. So I can relate to all the stress that everyone has experienced. In my second session after this session, I'm going to be talking about self-care and strategies for handling your emotions. And so after this talk, that talk will be about specific strategies of emotion regulation, if you're interested in attending later on. I will share my screen now. Can you see this?
Yes, Tasha, we can see it.
Okay, great. Let me close my little pictures. The first thing, a lot of these statistics are from the United States. I don't have statistics about Colombia, but I'm assuming that it's similar all around the world. I've seen studies of different countries that all kind of point to the same thing. So it's about 40% of people have at least one mental or behavioral health problem due to COVID. So this could be depression, anxiety, drug use, alcohol, overeating, gambling, buying too many things online. It's a behavior that's out of control and is not helping the problem, or mental health symptoms. So when we hear statistics like this, we think, wow, that's a lot of people. But remember that that also means that 60% of people are not having major adjustment problems. Some people actually like being home. Some people like eating at home, being close to their children, not having to pay for childcare, not having to pay for car maintenance. Some people have really enjoyed learning new technologies of online education. Some people have taken this as a chance to reinvent their life, to change all the things they didn't like about their life before. So keep in mind that there's a lot of diversity, and every response is normal. So whether you're having major problems or not, your response is normal for the situation that you're in. Also keep in mind that a lot of people do not have the privilege of working from home. So that's one of the ways that I have kind of kept from getting too depressed sitting in my dining room for 16 months, is that I have the privilege of sitting in my dining room for 16 months. I don't have to be out working in a hospital. I don't have to be out pumping gas. I don't have to be out around all the people with COVID. So a lot of people don't have the privileges that I've had, and recognizing privilege as well as being grateful for that privilege is a great strategy for trying to keep yourself grounded. So let's talk about some of the major challenges that students have faced during COVID. A lot of students have lost their jobs and have financial struggles. In the United States, half of the students, this is a survey of about 30,000 students, half of the students were reporting that they skipped meals at least once a day because they didn't have money for food. And so if you think about my university, I work at a rural, isolated state university. We never have any money. Our students come from the lower classes in large part. Our students are mostly first generation college students who have no role models in their families about how to be a college student. So about 70% of them receive financial aid from the government in order to attend the university. So they're already starting out at a disadvantage. Many students have a lot more privilege and have not struggled as much as maybe our students have. But as I mentioned, however you're responding is normal. The other thing that our students face, and there have been studies all around the world that show the same thing, is that the students did not have high quality laptops. They didn't have video cameras or microphones. They don't have high-speed internet. So doing all of their classes online became really, really stressful. And I'll give an example of high school students in my area who live on the Native American Indigenous reservation. Those students all have to go into a parking lot across from a gas station to do their classes because it's the only part of the area that gets good internet. So imagine all those kids sitting out there in a parking lot trying to do their classes. The other issue that students face is that they're often sharing one laptop and their parents are also using the laptop for work. Their children, younger siblings, maybe their partners also working from home. So depending on the size of the house, you could have 5 or 6 people with 1 or 2 computers all needing to do work at the same time, which can become very stressful. The other issue many people have faced is the lack of childcare. All of the preschools closed, all of the daycares closed. So parents are now also homeschooling children. And they're feeling very isolated and anxious. They may have also had loved ones who got the virus or who died. In the United States, 600,000 people have died from COVID. And in all the countries around the world, we're seeing political violence, riots, protests, people coming to acknowledge the racial inequalities and marching for civil rights. So this is also happening all over the world. One thing that's important to recognize is that women and persons of color are more greatly impacted by all of these things than men and white people. So this is just 1 month, December 2020, when we looked in the United States at the unemployment numbers, 140,000 women lost jobs, while 16,000 men found jobs. So there was 1 quarter there around December 2020, one financial quarter, where 100% of the unemployment were by women. So this is really affecting women more than anyone who have to care for children, parents, spouses, and still do their schoolwork or still do their employment work. The other group that has been really suffering more than others is students with disabilities. A lot of students rely on lip reading, and this has become very difficult if they are wearing masks, and hard of hearing people cannot rely on facial expressions and lip reading. Many of our students with disabilities have a very hard time in the Zoom meetings because we often use breakout rooms where they have to have small group discussions with their peers. And those breakout rooms, the students are talking really fast, and the students with disabilities may need an interpreter or a sign language assistant, or may need some captioning, and the captioning is not working for the breakout rooms. And so the lack of accommodations has been really detrimental to people with disabilities. So that was a little bit about students. Let's talk about faculty during COVID. They have all of those same challenges that I just talked about with students. They also have the issue of students not engaged in the classroom. Every faculty member in every committee meeting I'm ever in talks about how the students all have their cameras off and they don't even know if they're paying attention. So some of the reasons students have their cameras off is because their internet is faster if they're not using the camera. Another reason they might have the camera off is because they don't want you to see what's happening at home. It could be little kids running around. It could be other people working in the area. Maybe their house is really small or they don't want you to see it. So there could be many reasons they have the camera off, but it does make it really difficult for faculty to feel a connection with the students. And so this is probably the #1 complaint I got from faculty in the past year. The other thing that faculty struggle with is that administration has instructed them to be very lenient, to be very forgiving. So to let students turn things in late, to let students give excuses, to make up exams. So this becomes very stressful for instructors because instructors have a grading schedule where they're scheduling time to grade the exams or papers or projects for each class throughout the term. And when that's interrupted by 10 students turning it in 2 weeks later or at the end of the term, it becomes very difficult to get all the grading done in time and prepare your lectures at the same time. There are also constant changes in protocols and policies. I don't know if this happened with you, but in the US, it seemed like every month they completely changed the COVID rules, the protocols, how to respond to students, how to do classes, and we were always confused. The other thing that faculty are struggling with is that they are really burdened by student mental health and family problems. And in psychology, we call this vicarious trauma. You are being traumatized by someone else's trauma. So, I mean, we have been hearing about students, family members committing suicide, students being homeless, starving, all kinds of problems, living in their car. And so it becomes very stressful because we are not qualified to counsel students. We are not psychologists. Even me, as a psychologist, I'm not qualified to do counseling. I'm not that type of psychologist. So this becomes vicarious trauma for the adults who care about the students, but really can't do a lot to help them. Also, suddenly, I don't know how your university worked, but we had about a week and a half to turn all of our classes into online classes. So we had about 10 days, and the surveys in the US showed that 50% of instructors had never taught anything online before, and now 100% are online. So having to transition was very stressful. It was the end of March and we finished our term in the middle of May. So it was like 6 to 8 weeks of stress. As I mentioned before, female professors and researchers have more challenges because they typically take on multiple roles of caregiving. Also, research on student evaluations shows that students want women to be warm and caring and maternal, and they want you to be like a mother figure to them, but they do not expect male faculty to be paternal and caring and act like their dad. So as I mentioned before, people with disabilities also had a much harder time being instructors during COVID, and they are also at greater risk for COVID, for contracting COVID because their systems are often already vulnerable. So this is a lot of stuff that you probably experienced. You probably know all about this. I'm probably not telling you anything new, but I'm hoping that some of the strategies might be helpful for the fall or for next year. So I wanted to start by going over a little bit of psychology, a little bit about how stress works and how stress affects people. So how much stress can we handle? The first thing to realize is that stress is actually positive for humans. Without stress, we would not know how to adapt to challenges. So without stress, we would not learn coping skills. We would not learn how to triumph over difficulties. So all of us have stress. It's a normal part of life, and it's good for us, and it builds our resilience. There's a middle ground called tolerable stress. This is more severe stress, but it's limited in how long it lasts. So at the time that it's happening, we feel like it's the end. We can't go on. So you may have, lost a loved one, or maybe you got a divorce, or maybe someone in your family is incarcerated or struggling with substance use, and you just feel like, I'm never going to be able to get over this. It's so hard. But we learn skills, we adapt, and over time, even that kind of stress becomes beneficial. If you look back in your life over the most stressful experiences that you've had, you probably learned something very important from them. You probably learned about yourself, and you probably learned about how you can cope with things better in the future. I just saw in the chat that they can't hear the interpretation. Just checking to make sure it's still going.
Sí.
You can still hear it? Okay, good. All right, so then the third type of stress is called toxic stress. This is stress that's so intense, it might be so often that you cannot develop resilience. You just cannot cope with it. For some people, that's how COVID has been. For other people, COVID has not been a toxic stress. So it depends a lot on your neurophysiology and how you've developed as a child and all of the genetic and other factors that come into play. So toxic stress usually really starts to break down the system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how toxic stress breaks down the system, and starting with the HPA axis. You can see the words there on the diagram. Hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis, the HPA axis. So this is the hypothalamus in the brain, the pituitary gland in the brain, and the adrenal glands on your kidneys. These three systems work together to modulate or regulate stress hormones. So I always give the example of, say you were walking down the street and you step off the curb and an ambulance comes zooming by at full speed, and you realize you're almost getting hit by an ambulance, and you take a deep breath and then you step back on the curb, and then you watch the ambulance go by, and then you take a deep breath and your body returns to normal. So that's what the HPA axis does. It quickens your breathing, it opens your eyes, dilates your eyes, it circulates stress hormones to get you ready to run or freeze or fight if you have to. And then when the threat is over, you go back to normal. But when you have toxic stress over a prolonged period of time, it starts to affect your entire functioning. So it actually stops neural growth in the brain. So it actually kills brain cells in certain parts of the brain. It can also impair your immune system. So you will notice that students often get sick during midterm exams and final exams. When we have a lot of stress, our immune system tends to shut down. We also get stress on our cardiovascular system. Our heart gets stressed. We might get high blood pressure. So this stress is real and it breaks down all of the systems in the body. And so it's not just a mental issue. It's a full holistic mind-body connection. So my research examines what we call adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. In these adverse childhood experiences, these are bad things that happen to us when we're children, such as being abused or neglected, having a parent who was on drugs, having a parent who was incarcerated, homelessness, domestic violence, etc. So these adverse childhood experiences have been found to be linked to adult health problems. So if you experience 4 or more of these, especially, is when we see a huge increase in all of those physiological problems like heart disease, obesity, cancer, and drug use, etc. So the more ACEs you had, the more likely you are to have a physical or mental health problem. There are also challenges in our environments, such as lack of access to clean water, violence in the community, discrimination, racism, and I have some new ones that we've all experienced over on the left: COVID, racial unrest, political violence, and the economic downturn. So all of these adverse childhood experiences affect us as we are developing as children, but they also affect us if we experience them as adults. But if we had a very happy and supported and healthy childhood, we are much better able to handle these types of ACEs as an adult. So having a happy, healthy childhood sets you up to face adversity as an adult. But if you had a lot of ACEs as a child, you're less likely to cope with things like COVID without having major mental or physical health problems. So these ACEs are very important to think about in how our students have reacted to COVID, because I know for our students, many grew up in poverty, they had a lot of ACEs, and they are the first generation to go to college. They live in poverty in large part, and so they were already at a disadvantage when COVID came around. So one of the things that I always like to teach my students is, especially when you're working with kids or young adults, sometimes things look like mental health, quote, symptoms. And I put symptoms in quotes because are they really mental health symptoms, or are they normal reactions to toxic stress? Most of the time, they are actually normal, developmentally appropriate reactions to toxic stress. And so that means if we can correct for the trauma, we can see a reduction in the symptoms. So we often see things like substance use or sleep problems, depression, failing classes, unable to concentrate. And a lot of those things are related to trauma, and they are not necessarily a diagnosable mental health condition. So it's important to recognize that in a serious mental health diagnosable condition is quite different from normal reactions to a trauma. And so we really want to deal with the trauma and helping them to develop some coping skills for dealing with that trauma. So it's a balancing act. You have a bunch of ACEs maybe in your childhood, you have a bunch of stressors now, and you need corrective experiences, you need protective experiences, because it's always a balancing act between stress and protective factors. We're always looking for that balance. And so you, as a mentor or an instructor or an adult in the lives of students, your job is to increase the weight of protective factors for students. So that's what I tried to do as department chair. As I mentioned, I was chairing the largest department on our campus with 600 undergraduate students and 90 graduate students, 18 faculty. And so I was experiencing a lot of vicarious trauma hearing what everyone's going through and trying to keep this department together. And so I just tried to every month send emails to the students with coping strategies, with links to resources, with exercises they could do. And I did get a lot of emails from students saying, you know, my friends in other departments don't even hear from their department chair. And we're so happy that you are thinking of us and that you're giving us strategies to try to deal with the stress. So what are some of the most common protective factors that help us to become resilient over stress? Loving attachment figures is the #1 thing. So nobody overcomes trauma alone. It's always because they have someone who values them as a person and will always be there for them and accepts them exactly how they are. So resilient people, even though it seems like, wow, they had all these ACEs, their childhood was so terrible, look at all the stress and look how well they're functioning. It's usually not a miracle. It's usually because at least one person was there for them, cheering them on. Caring teachers, which means all of us who teach students, can be a protective factor. That means that we are valuing the students, we're listening to them, we're taking their opinions into account, maybe sending surveys to them. There are also some internal factors that lead to higher levels of resilience. Students with high intelligence tend to be able to seek out resources and find ways to overcome stress. So they might be able to hook up with a friend's family or find things online, but they can usually create some sense of resilience for themselves. Also, students with charming personalities, they tend to have people gravitate towards them. And so they tend to be more resilient because people want to help them. People like them. Those who live in a safe environment are more likely to be resilient in the face of trauma. Those who have good nutrition. It's very interesting. I don't have time to go into all the details right now, but you should know that there's something called the gut-brain axis. The gut meaning your inside of your stomach. So your gut, we now know, is connected to your brain. And all of those neurotransmitters related to depression and anxiety, they actually have receptors inside your stomach, more than in your brain. So that means we have to take care of our gut if we want to take care of our mental health. We have to take care of all of the bacteria, you know, all of the yogurt and things and kombucha. I love kombucha. It cleans out the gut really nice. And finally, having mentors who can show them the way towards the future, talking about their own struggles, being honest about how hard it was for them and what they did to overcome it. These are all things that relate to students overcoming trauma. So I'm going to go over some of the methods we used in the US, and all of these we used at my university. And remember, our population is a little bit more disadvantaged than a lot of universities. But what we did was we partnered with computer companies. We got federal and state funding to provide students with personal hotspots. We got laptops that we mailed to them in the mail. Everyone got a $50 a month voucher for the rest of the term to pay internet bills. We also provided for basic needs. So we have a food pantry on campus where students can come 7 days a week and get healthy, fresh food for free. And if students got COVID, thankfully, we only had, I think, 10 COVID cases the whole time. But those who were quarantining, we delivered all of the meals to them. And then we provided housing on campus. Even though most students went home, we kept in mind that some students cannot go home. And this might particularly be true for LGBT students who might not feel safe at home. Their families may have disowned them. They may have experienced abuse from their families. And so when they came to college, our campus actually became their home. So a lot of students have nowhere to go. And so we provided socially isolated housing for students who told us that they could not go home. We provided emergency loans of up to $1,000 for students who were homeless or had lost their job. We also provided unlimited counseling sessions from licensed mental health professionals, and these were by Zoom. We gave vouchers for buses and other transportation if people needed money to get home, maybe take a bus or a train home, or if they had to fly. And then we helped them find jobs if they lost their jobs. And we also got a huge grant from the state to provide employment on campus. So we were able to provide jobs for around 3,000 students. We also were very lenient in our grading. This was really hard for faculty because faculty did not want to lower their standards, but we knew that students were probably going to drop out of college if we didn't allow them to take the class credit, no credit. And I don't know if you have that option, but we allowed that. And usually we don't allow that if it's in your major area of study. You cannot do that. You have to get a letter grade, which in the US is A, B, C, D, F. So we allowed everyone to take classes credit, no credit, just in the hopes that they would stay in college. And then we also stopped giving big midterms and big finals and big papers. So we all created small assignments that were like, it's okay if you don't do well, it's not going to destroy your grade. Just small assessments throughout the term instead of big ones. We use a classroom management system called Canvas. I don't know what you guys use, but you might have Moodle or Blackboard, but we provided links in all of our Canvas courses for everything they might need, from food to child abuse reporting to domestic violence resources, rape crisis. We know that domestic violence and child abuse have increased exponentially during COVID, and kids and women are trapped at home with their abusers. So this is really difficult, and we provided resources for them on the Canvas page. For our faculty who are very concerned about bad teaching evaluations during COVID, we allowed them to opt out of these teaching evaluations being included in their files for promotion. I was just shocked actually that 70% of my faculty had almost perfect teaching evaluations. The students were so grateful for all this leniency, for all these changes, for all this caring, that their evaluations were wonderful. And so many of our faculty wanted those included in their promotion file, but some faculty really got bad evaluations, especially those who did not know how to teach online and hated it. We allowed them to take those evaluations out of their permanent file. We also partnered with social agencies and religious groups to donate things to students like diapers, feminine hygiene products, masks, soap, and hand sanitizer. We got corporate sponsors to donate things to students. So we really tried to meet all their basic needs, to be protective factors, to help them become resilient, to help them cope with mental health, to help them cope with physical health. We tried everything we could, and we still saw a lot of students drop out. So let's talk about part of the reason they drop out. Students hate online education. And the main reason they hate it is because faculty are not trained in the best practices. So faculty are trying to deliver their courses exactly the same as they do in person. And that is just not how online education works. So like I said, 70% of my faculty have taken workshops and training and know all the technology, and they got great evaluations because they really modified their classes for this new environment. Students want synchronous classes because they don't have the maturity or the time management skills to deal with all their assignments on their own. So most of our students, we surveyed them, most of them want at least some of the classes to be live, where they watch a live lecture. However, they cannot watch more than about 30 minutes without losing their attention. So lectures about 30 minutes, and then other active learning strategies where they're interacting with each other. The other thing is, though, a sizable minority like the asynchronous classes because they have children or they work full-time, so they want to be able to log in and do their work at their convenience. So I, as department chair, I made sure we had equal numbers of synchronous and asynchronous so that we could keep as many students as we could. So this was an interesting survey that showed that faculty's perceptions became more positive over time. And this was only a 3-month period where in May, only 39% of faculty felt that online instruction was an effective way to teach a class. But by August, almost half said that it was. And so now it's even more positive. So as I mentioned, some faculty actually are very excited to learn new strategies. And I know my faculty that have very young children, like toddlers and babies, they really like teaching online because childcare is so expensive and the childcare centers are closed anyway. But they really liked changing to online. Also, faculty who have health problems. We have a couple of faculty who are cancer survivors or who have had heart surgeries. And so they really like being able to stay at home and teach online. As I mentioned before, most of the faculty say that lack of student engagement is the biggest problem. So what we did was we invested substantial money. For young faculty, $3,000 is a lot of money. And so we paid everyone to come to 6 weeks of training over the summer and learn the best practices in online education and how to transform your class. You're not going to teach the same class that you've been teaching in person. It's got to change. Each course was provided a professional instructional designer who helped design the Canvas page and helped them with making the links and uploading the assignments and thinking about the best way to obtain certain objectives. They also provide online tutorials and live help. Whenever faculty need it, they can call someone and say, my class is crashing, or this thing is not working, or it deleted an exam or whatever. we always have people available to help. They also developed an awards program so that we could showcase the best online classes. And so faculty submitted their Canvas pages, and then a group of online education experts evaluated those. And we had a little conference showcasing the best innovations, the best design courses, you know, how to assign quizzes, best ways for student engagement. And so they're all learning from each other now. I really like this article. If you have a chance to look it up, it's online, it's free. It's called The New Normal in Education. And it's very philosophical, but I really liked this quote. How can one resist the slide into passive technologization and seize the possibility of achieving a responsive, ethical, humane, and international transformational approach to education? So basically, we're not going to be successful by just turning our old methods into a technology method. We really have to think about how can we be responsive and be protective factors for students and support them and have a mentoring relationship with them. So these are some of the things we've learned in our trainings of best practices in online education. Active learning is best. So all the assignments should be problem-based or product-based. So the old method is exams and papers, but we need to think about smaller assignments, more of them, where they're presenting something active that they've done. So during class, using polls, asking their opinions, showing live data, using breakout rooms where they have to discuss readings or solve problems. Having guest speakers is great, where you give them a series of questions and then readings, and then the guest speaker will address that and they have to talk about it. Assigning them to work together so that they're not so socially isolated. And this can be asynchronously if necessary, if their schedules don't mesh, but having them teach each other concepts, develop presentations, writing a blog post. So for example, when I'm teaching about transgender rights in different communities, and a hot topic right now is whether transgender students should be allowed to play in athletic sports. And so the assignment might be a blog where they have to write a blog, taking one side or the other of the concept, and then citing the research and what they've learned in class to support. So then they're showing me everything they've learned about the issue, and they can cite all of the research on the issue as well. Some of my colleagues have them do Twitter posts, so they learn some new concepts, and the Twitter posts are very short. You can only have a certain number of characters, and so they have to make a Twitter post that encapsulates whatever the topic was. There are some wonderful technologies that we've been trained on. VoiceThread is a really popular one. It's like a live conversation, but can be asynchronous if necessary. It has tons of features. They can upload videos, text, all kinds of stuff. I really like Animoto. This helps to create a sense of community in the class. Everyone makes like a 15 to 30-second video with photos from their family, their life, their animals, and it has music on it. And it just helps us get to know each other. And then I require them to comment on each other's Animoto and ask questions. And then I put them into study groups so that they have those Animoto buddies to study with throughout the semester. There's another great program called Go React that captures video, either your lecture or they can make presentations. What's cool about it is they can upload a presentation that they're doing some oral presentation about something, And then you can comment on it live while you're watching it, and you can grade it like while you're watching it, so they can see your thought process as you're watching it. So if you notice in the title of this slide, I have online in parentheses. The reason I have it in parentheses is that these are actually best practices for all education, not just online. So what I've been really working on for the past 20 years is becoming more of a guide on the side. So I'm sort of guiding them to discover things. The old method of teaching is like a sage on the stage, meaning you're the expert and you're pouring this information into their heads. That's kind of an old methodology that's not really working. So we want to hold students accountable for their own learning. And it actually makes your job as a teacher much easier because you're not responsible for everything. They're taking half the responsibility. So you really need to set clear boundaries, but also be flexible. As I mentioned, maybe changing the grading method or accepting late assignments. What I do is I give them a little pass that they can attach to their assignment. They're able to turn in 1 late assignment per term. Then I can keep up with the grading. Or they're allowed 3 free absences and they don't have to tell me about them. I don't need to know their personal business. They can just not come 3 times without penalty. So clear boundaries, but some flexibility. So this is the model that I like to think about in terms of teaching classes. It's called the Community of Inquiry Framework. And so community is a group of people who engage collaboratively. That means together. So you're not in charge, you're just guiding, and they're doing equal parts of work to construct personal meaning and create critical thinking about the topic. So if you look at the gray center, that's their overall educational experience. And a lot of pieces go into that. So the teaching presence is definitely there. I mean, you're still in charge, you're still teaching, you're still an expert. So there is definitely some delivery of material, but it's much less than in the old school way of teaching. There's a cognitive presence where you're expecting them to read and think and talk and write. So there's a lot of cognitive processing, a lot of activity of the brain. There's the social presence, which is where that attachment comes in, where you are an attachment figure for them. You're a mentor. You're supporting their discovery of their own knowledge. You're setting a climate of acceptance, of support, where people can make mistakes. And you're selecting the content, but they're also selecting some of the content. So this is a community of inquiry. It's not just you, the expert, delivering something to the student. All right, so what did we do for fall? So we have thousands of students who all want something different. We have students who are so depressed, so isolated, they're not going to come back to the university unless they can be in person. We still have COVID. We have so many students who moved back home to their parents and they want to stay online. So we need to please everybody. So I, as department chair, decided that I was going to make 30 to 40% of our classes in person. And the university is kind of overall going with this guideline. So for those students who have to be in person or they just feel like they're not going to make it, we have the opportunity for them to be in person. We're keeping the classes in large classrooms at 25 to 50% capacity with social distancing and masks, and faculty volunteer to teach these classes. We're not forcing any faculty to come in person, but many faculty also feel isolated. They miss the students and they want to do this. So we'll have plexiglass dividers in front of them. We also have many classrooms who have been outfitted with high flex technology, which means, as you can see, these students are in the classroom, but at the same time, there's other students who are zooming in live. And so this is great. It's a flexible model where they are there in class live, but they're zooming in. So we allowed the people who had to be in person because they just felt like they couldn't do online anymore. We let them register for classes first because we only have a few classes in person. And so once those students were done registering, then the high flex students could register where they wanted the class, but they wanted to be online. We have a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous to please everybody. We also have to think about, there are students who began their college career with us who have never been to our campus. It's now 2 years they've been online. And so we can't have requirements that they have to be in person because they've never been in person and they're finishing their degree. But we also have to consider those who are hungering for the human interaction. So this is how I scheduled the fall classes, is I tried to please everybody. And of course, they're not all happy, but I did what I could. Offering night and weekend courses. And if you're coming in person, we are requiring the vaccine. And this is maybe a little more difficult in Colombia because you don't have as much vaccine. But all of our faculty are vaccinated, and our students, if they want to be in person, have to be vaccinated, but they can choose to stay online if they want to. We also have many outdoor classes, especially in the sciences like biology, botany labs. They're just doing it outside by the trees that they're going to be studying. Maybe they're walking, demonstrating things out on the football field. So many classes are able to use outdoor spaces. All right, so that's the end of my formal presentation. That is my email there. I would love to hear from you if you would like to email me, if you want to share anything with me or ask any questions. And let's open it up now to a general discussion. And I'd love to answer your questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Tasha, and thank you everyone who is connected. As we usually do, Tasha, for the questions, I will ask you to switch to the Spanish channel so that you can listen to the translation. And I think we already have one question on the chat. And actually it's in English right now. The question is from Jorge Santos, and he says, is there any way or tool to identify these risk factors?
Yes. We have a statewide mandate from our governor in California that all children will be assessed on ACEs. This is the first campaign that's statewide, and you know how big California is. We're the world's 5th biggest economy, so we're like our own country. So it's like if a country said, we find this so important, we're going to assess all children. There are problems with it in that once you assess it, you have to be able to provide services. So you have to be able to provide referrals and resources for people to cope with trauma. But right now we're at the first stage, which is training 20,000 doctors, pediatricians on ACEs and teaching them about this issue. And then they're starting to implement the screening, and the state pays them for the screenings that they do as part of their intake proceedings. Now, not everyone who's traumatized needs services. Some people have coped just fine. So the decision tree that comes with the assessment that is like 4 or more ACEs, but no symptoms, no problems. We just give them information about ACEs and ask if they have questions and send them home with some reading material. Some people have ACEs and they have a lot of problems and they need more intensive services.
Okay. Thank you, Tasha. We got one more question. Para los que están enviando sus preguntas, les recordamos que hay una sección que se llama preguntas y respuestas, donde las pueden enviar para que por favor no las envíen al chat. So, this question is also already in English, and they say, how do you manage a mixed class, face-to-face and virtual at the same time?
So I don't know what, Juan, were you translating my answer or?
No, the answer is already in English, and I'm going to give you some context. And this is because in Colombia, when we
What's he talking about?
reopening the universities and...
I can hear you.
Can you hear me in English?
Yeah. Do you remember the answer or should I go? Okay.
No, it's because we got another question.
Okay. What's he talking about?
I am briefing you about it. In Colombia, when we went back to universities, like they open again.
I can't hear him, so I don't know what he's talking about.
De pronto es que Tasha tiene seleccionado otro audio.
Tasha?
She was going to translate my answer. I don't know what you're talking about, but did she heard my answer, right? You heard it, Claudia?
Oh, okay. Ya entendí qué pasa.
Claudia, can you hear me?
Okay, ya no estaba en tu canal. Okay. Okay.
Now, what were you saying?
Sorry about, no, that's okay. It was my mistake. I didn't choose a Spanish channel. But this question is about how do you manage mixed class or blended class, I would say, between face-to-face, like being present in the classroom, and virtual class at the same time?
Well, we have the HiFlex technology at the training over the summer, so we're trained how to do it. The camera follows you, and then the students at home on Zoom, you can see them, like in the picture I showed. So there's really no difference. It's just they're sitting there in the classroom on a computer screen and the rest of the class is in person, but the assignments and everything are the same.
Okay. ¿Alguna otra pregunta que nos quieran compartir a través de la sección de preguntas? O, no sé, a los que están conectados.
Juan.
Sí.
Juan, ¿cómo estás? Con William.
Hola.
Es que no está funcionando, o por lo menos a mí no me funciona la sección de preguntas y respuestas. Entonces, okay. He visto que hay unas manos levantadas en este momento, pero yo tengo una pregunta también. No sé si le damos paso a las personas que tenían la mano levantada.
No veo, estoy viendo espectadores, no veo ninguna manito arriba, así que si quieres...
Sally González, no, ya la bajo. Pero mi pregunta es la siguiente. Se ha hecho un enfoque muy fuerte en los estudiantes. ¿Cómo han hecho ellos para atender las necesidades emocionales, psicológicas de los profesores y de los investigadores de la universidad donde están?
Well, the things that I talked about, such as not requiring the teaching evaluations for their promotion files, providing free online counseling, paying them to train for all these online strategies, having many meetings and surveys about what they want and how they're doing.
Muchas gracias, mi amor.
Ok, bueno, pues no sé si tengan más preguntas, una última oportunidad de enviar las preguntas. De lo contrario, creo que daríamos por cerrado esta sesión y tenemos invitarlos, aprovecho. Bueno, creo que alguno hay preguntas. Ok, hay una pregunta, la leo en español, es de Sally y Claudia me ayudas con la traducción, por favor. Hemos tenido casos de estudiantes y compañeros docentes que han sufrido la muerte de más de un familiar o cercano y es casi imposible que se conecten de nuevo con el proceso educativo. ¿Qué recomiendas a las instituciones y a los docentes en estos casos?
Well, there's really nothing you can do that's going to make them feel better. But we have had, gifts sent to them, cards. The president of the university sends them greetings. We check up on them once a month to see if they need anything. So it's really just being a support system, but there's nothing you can really do to help someone overcome such a trauma. At our university, we tend to know all of our students. And so we have certain faculty that they've been doing research with them or they're in projects with them. So those are the ones who usually are keeping the closest contact with them. We've had not as much COVID deaths, but we've had more like suicides and drug overdoses. And it's still, there's nothing you can really do except support them.
Gracias, y voy a revisar. Tenemos otra pregunta de Jorge Santos. Él dice, los apoyos para conectividad entregados a los estudiantes para facilitar su formación ¿Son dados por la universidad o son del estado de California?
We got federal funding, state funding, and we worked with corporations to donate equipment. And then we also changed our budget. Like I do the budget for my department, and a large part of the budget is like buying paper and office supplies. But since we didn't need those things, we bought some laptops and some cameras and things to give to the students. They're loaning. They have to give it back after COVID. And then a lot of the internet providers, if you could show that you were low income, they would give 6 months of reduced internet for like $10 a month. So it was like a team effort of all the corporations, agencies, governments helping everyone.
Ok, creo yo que ahora sí no tenemos más preguntas. I think, Tasha, we are done with the questions for now. So, thank you, Tasha, for this lecture. Y a todos los que están conectados, les recordamos que a las 7:40 vamos a tener un break de 15 minutos. Tenemos una charla sobre estrategias al respecto de las ciudades, de los cuidados socioemocionales en los procesos de investigación. Esta charla comienza en 15 minutos. Le pido el favor a Pablo de nuestro equipo que nos ponga en el chat de esta charla el enlace para quienes de pronto no lo tengan, para que por favor se conecten. Los invitamos a que se conecten y les agradecemos que estén con nosotros. Entendemos que hoy estamos compitiendo contra el juego Colombia-Brasil. Espero que estén acá en vez de en el juego. Y nada, va a ser una charla muy interesante también con Tasha sobre estas estrategias al respecto de los cuidados socioemocionales en los procesos investigativos. William, no sé si tengas algo más que decir para el cierre de esta primera charla del día de hoy.
No, muchísimas gracias. Pues quisiera agradecer primero a Tasha Howe, la doctora Tasha Howe, y en segundo lugar, agradecerle a todos los investigadores, a cada una de las personas que se conectaron hoy, y a ti también especialmente por la invitación, a nuestra traductora, y te agradezco muchísimo esa invitación que nos ha ayudado mucho al equipo de investigadores. Muy amables. Hasta luego.
Muchas gracias a todos, and hopefully I will see you in a few minutes to learn some emotion regulation strategies.
I will stay.